Studying in discovering. The impact of a contribution, like that of a fall, is measured by its distance from the original position. Unfortunately, humans are inherently resistant to change, including cases where one individual deviates positively from the rest. Regarding the anti-Kondo community, it was mentioned previously that the more corrupt users are willing to sabotage the progress of their peers, engineering lies about their rivals within or outside of their anti-Kondo group. This was mostly found in LARPA groups, though genuine anti-Kondo groups are prone to this mistake as well. In the cases of LARPA groups, its significant members only establish a false premise of terminating accounts, while bots make up most of the standard members to create an illusion of significance. In many cases where an anti-Kondo group is criticized for this, rather than explaining the current methods or adjusting them, the higher ranks delete any messages regarding the group's true progress. Sometimes, anti-Kondo groups were raided, and users' accounts were falsely reported. Furthermore, the current difficulty of understanding true leadership often places the wrong people in power, giving them the capacity to sabotage the anti-Kondo community for their own benefit. Applying appropriate disciplinary measures were also something primarily attainable through experience, contributing to further disorganization or resentment within an anti-Kondo group. For example, a higher rank member is more likely to receive a light warning for internal conflict, rather than the removal applied to lower rank members. Neither would be the correct option, since internal conflict occurs from misalignment with the group's purpose. Both sides are ideally educated and reinforced about the objective. The Kondo community are their enemies, and they alone are their enemies. Adequate leadership is not the only crucial component that is difficult to obtain and necessary for group consistency. When a member, especially a higher rank, is placed under suspicion of contradicting the group's values, adequate evidence is necessary for swift action. If the defendant's actions were committed on an alternate account, any loose connections, such as alternate account naming schemes, nationalities, or speech habits, will not be sufficient, as all of them could be intentionally forged. Never propose a theory before identifying proof. Instead, prove your theory before proposing it. Keep in mind that adequate proof will only be effective against the most consistent anti-Kondo groups, those that prioritize the Kondo community's elimination. LARPers have never acted on pure reason, and are unlikely to change this process. Their alleged crimes were almost always directed against other anti-Kondo users, including doxing, swatting, mass violence attempts and threats to kill friends and family, arson and property damage threats, and violating interstate cyber communication laws. The LARPer groups clearly have been influenced by the con member, as their actions and mindset towards crimes are similar. As mentioned before, contribution addresses distance from the original position. During my interactions with several former anti-Kondo users, not only were people deterred because of the limited progress, but the methods and conflicts of the groups, along with the users' experiences, actively hinder the community's progress. Without complete and unified effort towards a permanent outcome, the anti-Kondo community will not shift from its current state, and thus lack decisive significance. This is what makes each news incident regarding the Kondo community, and the predators they foster, just as impactful as the previous one. The ethical foundation of many anti-Kondo groups had either become obsolete or been replaced with an irrelevant desire for power. Whether this was conscious or not, the anti-Kondo community's opposition to beneficial change was its greatest obstacle. Moral cowardice and intellectual corruption are the natural outcomes of unchallenged privilege. Growing in contacting. It does not matter whether someone calls themselves an anti-condo user or not, or which group they work with, but rather their actions and goals. To proclaim allegiance with the anti-condo community is to declare that this individual or group was resolved to dedicate maximum effort against the condo community and its influence. This cannot be accomplished through distant methods. When I had compiled my information on both sides, I needed personal interaction to fully grasp their nature. Because this also exposes the researcher to corruptive values, no comparison is more fitting than a trial by fire. Even in the anti-condo community, similar pressures aren't uncommon. The institutional favoritism or operational inconsistencies have the potential to severely deter those with true intellectual strength, someone who knows the anti-condo community's goals and how to work towards them. Even if punishments were fairly applied, it would be wasteful to dismiss the chance to reinforce the group's purpose to both the offender and the moderator addressing them. My own beliefs about the ODH's purpose were flawed, and it was only through testing them that I was able to grow as an anti-condo scholar. When these values remain unrefined, unchallenged, anti-condo users develop corrupt principles, hindering the progress of the anti-condo community. Countless groups who once sought for a beneficial impact now pursue money or membership quantity, most commonly through a transition to inadequate ownership. Even the most prominent anti-condo groups are vulnerable to diluting their true values, or becoming unable to explain them concisely and verbally. What helps the offender recognize intellectual strength? Banning explicit content because it is immoral, or because it propagates innate weakness? Undoubtedly the latter. Yet, so entrenched are traditional morals in the anti-condo community that they lose consciousness of how much the world has changed. They only remember the values of a world before the con member corrupts a vast portion of the modern generation, rendering all traditional methods inapplicable. This is how several anti-condo groups, victims to futility and disbelief, target more influential figures for money and member growth, rather than adapting or developing their own strategies and contributions. The same sense of futility and disbelief in one's own abilities hinders intellectual strength in more than just consistency, but also in growth. Multiple times, I had seen anti-condo groups rise and fall, and each fall was out of the con members' perceived inevitability. In both values or objectives, the anti-condo community was already divided. Strong values with unrealistic objectives leads to inactivity. Achievable objectives with rarely reinforced values instigates conflict. Inadequacy in both values and objectives results in a personalized and incoherent community, just as disorganized as a condo group. These groups respond to feedback with slander, threats, and intimidation, despite feedback being more important than before, especially in the digital age. To eliminate an epidemic, its cure must be normalized, and the same applies to eliminating the condo community. In both scenarios, identifying symptoms is easier than establishing its solution. And this is why many go no further than scapegoating individuals who apply maximum effort, often confusing them with the cause or denying the existence of alternate factors. Thus, many wronged by the anti-condo community only see them as innately corrupt, never recognizing the hidden influence of the con member. Everyone is tempted by an endless craving for freedom and instinct, which the condo groups promote. This fosters disorder and impulsive degeneracy, something that we know is detrimental, and yet the intellectually weak pursue it. It has been integrated into societal values as cultural and moral ideals, and yet they lead to the exact opposite. It is because the anti-condo community seeks to overcome innate desires that many of these users are driven apart or to inconsistency. These desires can be overcome while preserving dedication against weakness, but even for the naturally resilient it is difficult to correctly identify and discard the hindrances integrated into daily life. Recovery is even more difficult when intellectual weakness is acted upon, as this develops an imbalance in the delicate biology that facilitates humanity's strength. All true anti-condo users understood that personal pride, politics, morality, militarism, and a longing for community, all of this is secondary to the downfall of the condo community. We know that this can only be accomplished through collective intellectual strength. The worst things happen when good things become corrupt. Preserving in reminding. The question of the anti-condo community's productivity is undoubtedly decisive, especially when it opposes inherent corruption deriving outside the digital world. However, caution must be exercised to avoid misjudging universal flaws as impossible to overcome. Regarding the condo community's threat, people justify complacency by claiming that the con member will remain a problem regardless of any opposition from Roblox player base. There may be some who fall prey to the disbelief of their ability to contribute, but many more use this as an excuse to avoid contributing. This pattern applies to all those who rely exclusively on others' intellectual strength rather than their own. Did the bystander effect not demonstrate the drastic outcome of indifference, of waiting for others in the large Roblox community to act where you chose not to? Don't the Kohlberg moral stages reflect declining humanity through the public's growing reliance on reward, rather than beliefs, to prompt societal changes? Did the anti-condo community not, paradoxically, recognize that Roblox moderation retained inadequate tools to eliminate the condo community, while repeating the same mistakes of repeating a flawed method? And could they mostly have recognized and developed past their flaws without the consequences of internal conflict? Wasn't the common comparison of the anti-condo community to a movement inferring that the necessary objective requires collective effort? Can you deny that the condo industry is the only group that benefits from widespread disorder or indifference? It takes the con member's selfishness to attribute the blame of Roblox incidents to the parents or the moderation, when the central progenitors chose to act on the very same incident. And you tell me that the parents are responsible for not parenting correctly. Normally, it would be futile to address such deceitful weakness. I wouldn't have dedicated an article, let alone a book, to them had the con member not infiltrated so much of society, who intentionally or otherwise turned a blind eye to these saboteurs. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a con member who started blaming the parents, seeking to redirect responsibility from their own actions. Furthermore, these discussions are intended to give the intellectually strong the opportunity for growth at a time where honest objectives are obscured or twisted beyond recognition. Thus, I grew to refute the assertion that anyone other than the condo community is responsible for the predatory and explicit content plaguing Roblox, while simultaneously deteriorating individuals' development within their groups and communication channels. It is perfectly clear to anyone with adequate insight that continuous tolerance of the con member would end devastatingly for the current and future generations' understanding of humanity. Unfortunately, there are many who lack the insight or denied this truth. Those who deny the con member's growing influence are guilty of recognizing or enabling it too late or long, respectively. Denial.
keeps us from looking at ourselves or addressing something around us and making a change.
It serves to
provide relief to people who don't have the bandwidth or ability to face a problem.
Especially relevant to those trying to pass on the responsibility to another. However, keep in mind that not even these individuals are truly accountable for the extent that the con member erodes human strength. The deniers, in their limited insight, had been hiding from a responsibility that never belonged to them, but the con member. The con member was far from immune to denial. They, too, knew the extent of their evils.
Denial can also hurt when it involves addiction and can lead to unhealthy patterns that get passed down from one generation to the next.
Their justifications for the same crime vary. Condo creators had claimed,
"You cannot join one of these games on accident. If we're not minors, we're not bad people."
Or,
"There are more dangerous things than condos."
in efforts to deflect accountability. Returning to the topic of the anti-condo community, if its groups were to overcome the restrictions making intellectual strength rare, we would still retain a consistent objective compared to various other roadblocks groups, or even some groups in the physical world. Adequate leadership undeniably derives from understanding the value of humanity, as well as the ability to remind numerous individuals about this. The aforementioned denial, along with anything else that hinders intellectual growth, are incompatible with effective leadership. On further reflection, it is evident that all deficiencies to intellectual strength or powerful leadership occur from individual limitations. Inconsistent objectives. The leader's or member's memories are evidently fallible. Sabotage from another group. The opposition suffers from excessive pride and a resistance to growth. Unsustainable goals. Insight can only be developed through experience. Loss of group control. Either the leader or group purpose relies on impulse. There is no other truth. It takes experience or guidance to reach intellectual strength. To maintain optimal strength requires establishing a sustainable environment, one consistently cultivating logical thinking and productivity. Unrefined. The mind is an excellent servant, but a terrible master. Strengthening in overcoming. Just as human flaws are the base of a group's collapse, the same collapse points towards possible traits within the leadership or group culture. Corruption, neglect, inconsistency, all signs of leadership inexperience. If these are all absent in anti-condo groups, the most loyal members embody and inspire the truth and greatness of those fighting against intellectual corruption. Hundreds of individuals who recognize or overcome their innate impulses demonstrate the rewards they earned. This is consistent in various fields including literature, science, philosophy, and more. Unfortunately, the constant non-progress faced by the anti-condo community is not misfortune, but the long-term impacts of our predecessors' simplicity. We were far from adequately equipped to adapt while the condo community continues to spread its influence. It reinforced the informational deficiency I had long seen among the anti-condo community, which, like leadership limitations, had often remained hidden or actively obscured from the majority of users. Consider the circumstances in which many anti-condo users fell victim to futility. Did they not express disbelief over our objectives' achievability? And who would believe this if they genuinely cared about anyone other than themselves? Why did many go even further in telling the anti-condo community to disband? It might not even have been those members who proposed this willingly. Such justified selfishness and desire for comfort is characteristic of the con member. Who else would actively argue against opposing the condo community, while knowingly passing up the chance to grow as a human? None, especially not the intellectually strong. In the way that the victims of futility believe the con member, we can recognize that the clear cause of a group's decline must be identified beyond just the leader's capability. If the culture had really been sabotaged, then no matter how consistent the objective, the members would prefer departure over accomplishment. Decisions would be made on emotion alone, while the logic is restrained by selfishness and doubt. That is how the con member, indirectly or otherwise, erodes the necessity of strength and reservation. After this, people would not have become something they can be proud of. They would not have overcome the struggles challenging their identities. They would instead boast their cowardice and glorify the absence of willpower. They would ridicule the intellectually strong and vandalize their efforts out of jealousy. Above all, we would never have the terrible state of militaristic and political LARPing plaguing a portion of the anti-condo community. This wave of inconsistency would not work to this extent had the con member not struck at those whose human potential was growing. It shows that the inactivity of anti-condo groups was caused by, if leadership was not a factor, the con members' lies, which preyed on the vulnerable since their existence contradicted the values of society and strength. This vulnerability was exploited to the con members' ethical and moral poisoning, reverting the user to reliance on instinct and comfort. The reversion undermines the foundations of intellectual strength and is seen in multiple aspects of the modern age. Meanwhile, the impulsive lies of the con member directed the blame on the parents or moderation, who did everything they could to prevent the disorder that the condo community promotes. By branding the protection, incompetent as they may be, for the con members' incidents, the public turns their anger towards those who could have severed the true root of society's problems. In this, the public demonstrates how easily they are manipulated to glorify corruption and eagerly accept lies that align with impulse or comfort. The condo ideology's prevalence is what makes the con member so simultaneously weak and dangerous, profiting off of doubt and twisting the truths of human strength. Therefore, even the most obvious lie will remain if people wholly believe it to be true, a pattern that the con leaders have used numerous times. The con leaders are undoubtedly the most prominent users. After all, deception is necessary for them to thrive, to grow their groups and profits. They fool the con members into confusing impulse for humanity, when in fact it transforms them into the opposite. Both biologically and psychologically, the con member masquerades using the humanity they willingly discarded, and anyone who does not recognize this will only be fooling themselves. The human brain learns and decides beyond instincts. Addiction in indulging. For the Roblox community, it could be considered fortunate that the con member made regular appearances in the news. Otherwise, much fewer would recognize the terrible threat they bring. The corruption would have become more prevalent than now, while it still remains unrecognizable to the public. It's no accident that many anti-condo users instinctively spread awareness about condos. By informing people, they have the potential to purge the con member from their foundation, but often lack the motivation to do so. The consequence is that no one is taught to oppose threats to daily life with their life. Thus, modern efforts to prevent the spread of con members were rigid and declining. Exactly the same is true in the educators themselves. If they do not continue to remind themselves of everything they defend themselves against, Their exposure to corruption becomes more damaging than beneficial to their intellectual strength, and in the worst cases, makes them con members themselves. And so it was fortunate that I came to the realization that a group's objective required repetition. It had protected members from the con members' influence, while ensuring progression remained consistent. Even now, those who are unaware of the condo community or their true impacts are likely to see no flaws in impulse, making them vulnerable to the con members' beliefs. Awareness cannot promote action alone, but is still necessary to address the con members' influence. A distinction between motivation and knowledge must be drawn, as the said knowledge will become ineffective if the public continues taking it for granted. To the same outcome, from a different basis, the con member could be glorified or considered a necessary evil, scenarios that undoubtedly harm the public's understanding of human strength. Yet, these same scenarios repeat in modern life, thriving outside of public consciousness or individuals' reflection. The first step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. Warning in informing. Though the Roblox player base continues to grow, the question of acquiring, as well as maintaining, adequate moderation stepped further and further into psychological, rather than technological, territory. Unfortunately, Roblox administration did not recognize this option, instead believing they can rely on a rigid text filtration system. When they decided to pursue economic growth rather than adjust moderation, the result would enable the rapid spread of the con members' beliefs into society. The first notable obstruction to developing Roblox moderation was sacrificing its player base. As the number of players decline, the net worth of Roblox would reflect this, excluding the alternate accounts that are included in its player metrics. This same profit prioritization is what grants notable Roblox content creators, game or videos, more influence over the Roblox community and its administrators. Earnings and administration were so closely tied that often, the Roblox community is unable to provide feedback that Roblox is willing to adopt. This is evident in the Dr. Fatnik arrest in 2022. While some influencers do work to bring attention to the con members' detrimental nature, the vast majority of Roblox community had long lived with discontent and bitterness over the multiple incidents Roblox has experienced. The consequence? A division between the community and the administration. No economic prosperity can deny this. Just like with addressing the condo community, regarding Roblox's focus on profits, people come to the conclusion that it can't go on like this for much longer, without developing any definite ideas on what must be done. These were the typical patterns of disbelief victims, who sought to express what they want without working to achieve it. However, worse than this were the consequences induced by Roblox growth into an international digital superpower. Especially after the developer exchange program was introduced, the Robux currency had become as valuable as physical money. It had become the core motivator for various condo game creators, accelerating the decline of moral value in the industrial-focused digital age. Intellectual degeneration continued to spread. What made it most dangerous was that it accelerated at a time when the qualities of true leadership became rarer, as leadership positions became easier to obtain. Unfortunately, the growth of profit over strength was encouraged by the very authorities who should have regulated it, the Roblox administrators, who have the legal binding required to impose a permanent impact against the con members. It must be remembered, however, that not even these administrators recognize the ineffectiveness of their standard methods regarding permanent impact. Thereby, all intellectual strength has remained secondary to the value of profit, even when the former benefits both. Financial operations are more favorable than technological or psychological adjustments. Outside of research, it was no longer inviting for the human to enter any interaction with the con member. The human with true strength once resisted cheap bribery, declining the opportunity for corruption to attack. But regarded from the modern standpoint, the current generations lose grip on the intellectual basis of their status, and in an industrial society, bribery would become the driver for many notable condo game creators. Many con leaders were willing to pay their developers directly, all for the goal of destroying others' humanity. Thanks to Roblox, intellectual weakness and corruption had reached a financial appeal exploited by the con leader, the alienation of profit from human benefit. This is why I have often used the term condo industry. This is why con leaders opposed each other, with a con leader stating,
"I was so good at it. There's been 58 docs attempts on me."
The internationalization of Roblox, and by extension the condo community, had established the con member as an international threat to countless societies and hundreds more individuals. Granted, the Roblox community still attempted to ward off its allure. However, without a culture of intellectual strength or a clear objective, as a whole it remained a victim of the corruptive con members and their manipulation of modern values. The lasting conflict against the condo industry moved towards the visible fate of a gaming platform directed towards children, ravaged by corruption and con members who rarely received lasting consequences. At the time of writing, Roblox has been juggling several legal issues, including a subpoena, addiction-based lawsuit, and a child exploitation lawsuit. How impactful this will prove depends entirely on everyone's ability to comprehend that the true culprits have always been the con members. The scapegoating faced by both Roblox and parental figures were nonsense sprouted by these same culprits, and education is required to combat the errors so many have made in attempting to resolve Roblox notoriety for explicit content. The lies produced by con members created the most significant confusions. They were eagerly accepted by the public, and with astounding swiftness became the centerpiece of redirecting blame, while the con member continued to profit off of everyone's ignorance and complacency. It doesn't pay to ignore warnings, even if they don't make much sense. One of the worst indicators of intellectual decay was the growing half-hearted approach to various situations. This is always a consequence of uncertainty, and if present in group leaders or influencers, it results in actions becoming inconsistent with objectives. In the ODH, peace, or U-face, leadership education within groups, if present, was generally riddled with flaws. Preparation was either dedicated to fostering knowledge or ability, with little attention for the other. Even less emphasis was placed on developing the leader's character, which contributed to leadership being portrayed as solely the joy of responsibility, rather than including the willpower and decisiveness crucial for leadership. It does not produce the intellectually strong, but rather complacent intellectuals or hasty activists. People were drawn to becoming one of the two because they were easy to achieve and drew early results, despite earning little respect in the long run. It was not coincidental that the inactive or impulsive were just as vulnerable to the con members' demotivation. The flawed intellectuals or activists unintentionally become compliant with the con members' influence. Inactive intellectuals without ability, even with the right knowledge, cannot utilize it against the con member in any way. The impulsive activists may know where to strike at con members or even condo groups, but their methods of doing so remain repetitive and ineffective. Both groups are unable to develop both weaknesses and strengths further, demonstrating intellectual weakness, as this requires growth as much as it requires resilience. Precisely because the culture of the modern age revolved around freedom, everyone pursued a leadership position of their own, prompting the wrong type of leaders to show up more often, diluting the proportion of adequate leaders. This gave opportunities to the con leaders, who established an inhuman industry of their own creation. These arrogant beings, despite any facade they may put on in the physical world, have demonstrated the underlying selfishness, even justifying it to the con members. This is the kind of criminal glorification the con leader is capable of. Nothing else to them is conceivable. One who is prepared to diligently pursue intellectual strength cannot and will never become a con member. Anyone serious about the preservation of humanity's value would preserve it at all costs, in the face of any evils rising from innate weakness. Note that these individuals will rarely cry this out in the same way that the con leader presents their facade. The intellectually strong will most earnestly warn all those around them, preparing themselves beforehand. They will not adopt the attitude that the public will willingly reject the con member's philosophy, and in such a case must be willing to fight humans to preserve humanity. If the value of groups lies in the leader's personalization, it is most vulnerable to flawed leadership. Only in the rarest cases, even among the intellectually strong, can individuals mentor themselves into an adequate leader with extensive wisdom or character. The chance of possessing an intellectually strong leader can only be increased by actively recognizing and avoiding both the common and rarer mistakes. Consequently, the value and importance of a true leader cannot remain with the leader themselves, or the members will be influenced by the same misconceptions. This has been the mistake I made when training a successor for the ODH, and has been made with countless groups whose change in leadership led to inconsistency. Remember that a group is only as powerful as the leader, and not the other way around. Because of this, leaders must be humble enough to work just as much, if not more, than their members. Then these members will be obligated to consider the leader on even ground, rather than above them. While a group is as powerful as its leader, the specific power needed lies primarily in the group culture. I have learned that it is more necessary to reinforce than ever, for in recent times, anti-condo users began recruiting the indifferent public since dedicated members began growing rarer. With the fickleness of a con member, these people, even those from other anti-condo groups, have begun to speak of prioritizing activity or gaming events, actively seeking to cut down on productivity for their own benefit, and are representing anyone who disagrees as problematic. In reality, they are the same people who never reported a single group, never made a single piece of encouragement, never used proof in any of their efforts, never becoming productive members. At the first sign of opposition, they abandoned their group. In anti-condo groups they were rightfully removed from, they attempt to return under various premises, such as bringing activity, gaslighting, even faking amnesia, all of which no logical individual would consider. And even if they were willing to change, they will rarely restrain themselves when the group begins to struggle, and like before, they will swiftly abandon the group. If the leaders were not to blame for allowing these members to remain, they could at least be pitied because of their failure to reinforce consistent group culture. This illustrates a difficult predicament where little is gained, but much can be lost. To allow flawed leaders or members to remain in their current state is a flaw as widespread as inadequacy in leadership education, amplified by the excessive tolerance used to justify con members. Consequently, Any hope for change would prove detrimental as these individuals gradually undermine the foundations of group structure and consistency. Once this was accomplished, they vanished. That many never know or act upon this has remained a major contributor to the downfall of many Roblox groups. By employing without discrimination, through ignorance of circumstances, this shakes confidence among your force. Lamenting in denouncing. Yet another indicator of intellectual decay was the increasing cowardice when faced with responsibility, accompanied by the half-heartedness mentioned prior. The starting point of individual weakness lies in the cultivation of irresponsibility. Unfortunately, it has also been spread by the con member. Consequently, in hundreds of instances from both the physical and digital worlds, responsibility was evaded and inadequate measures preferred. This is evident in the attitudes of various LARPers towards their conflicts, and you can recognize the significance of cowardice when consequences become clear to them. In regards to the public, I have recognized three major behaviors. Media was often described as a great power, and rightfully so. Its importance remains significant as it continues to educate adults. Unlike scholarly education, the audience can be divided into three types. First, the easily influenced who believe everything stated, without taking any further learning or action. Second, those who fail to believe anything stated, similarly to those who have left various inactive groups before becoming a con member. Third, the intellectually strong who critically examine any piece of information presented. The impressionable first type is the largest in quantity, consisting of the general public. It is not affected by profession, but rather intelligence. Members of this group have never been trained to think independently, instead seizing the ideas of others out of mental slothfulness. Granted, they did recognize the difficulty and effort required to independently develop these ideas, which ironically prevented them from pursuing it. The impact of the news, as well as the con member, will be enormous. They are unable or unwilling to examine their situation, causing their entire attitude to be reliant on the influence of others. Given the internationalization of Roblox, and by extension the condo community, this component is more often utilized for nefarious purposes rather than beneficial or productive ones. The second type, consisting of skeptics, have experienced long and bitter disappointments that deter them from remaining among the first group. They either disregard common media topics or are provoked by the contents, perceiving them only as lies or falsifications. Even when presented with the truth, they often deny this information, hindering their intellectual strength to a similar extent as the first group. Consequently, they are unlikely to take action against the con member, instead embracing them due to their reliance on impulse and comfort alone. The third type is the smallest, consisting of the minds with genuine strength. They possess the gifts and education required to think independently, while maintaining adequate mastery over their impulses to avoid becoming con members. Everything they see will be thoroughly examined and integrated into further development. These people adore texts with intentionally structured analytical quality, including the witness itself. It must be admitted, however, that some of the information analyzed will never become useful. The extent of misinformation or exaggeration, even if recognized as such, will regardless occupy a potentially critical memory spot. It does not help that this group's strength lies in intelligence alone, in a context where the majority dominates societal decisions. The reason that so many today are oblivious to signs of true leadership is because the most notable positions are distributed by the first group, the simple-minded public. It was difficult for them to prevent the malicious from occupying a position of power or education, whether it is widely known or maintains power out of the public eye. If I had learned anything from interviewing other anti-condo users, it was that leadership is responsible for monitoring their group's education and eliminating all disorder. Leaders and educators must maintain strict control over both their own learning and their members to ensure the correct influence remains exclusively and consistently productive. This is why unity and repetition within a group's culture is integral to its activity, and if applied correctly, impact. To intellectually protect members of the first and second types, while cultivating the third's abilities, ensures all media will become productive against the con members' propagated weakness. We must never be convinced into neglecting others' humanity and ensure that the media, the instrument of modern education, must beneficially contribute. Sadly, there was only so much productive education I could reinforce. Every other minister, as well as some members, remember U-Face political structure. After all, U-Face started as a democratic LARPer group. If a part of yourself begins to rot, you must tear it out forcefully.